Hey everyone, do-it-yourself Andrew Flockhart here, and today I'm making a live edge floating mantelpiece. Everyone, back with another video. Today I'm fortunate enough to be making a floating live edge mantelpiece. I was able to snag this sweet piece of spruce from a buddy of mine. Shout out to Trevor, thanks for that. As you guys can see here, I'm just measuring up the mantelpiece. I ended up deciding on 4 feet, as the entire chimney that I was covering was going to be about 5 feet, and I wanted it to sit right in the middle of that. It was too big to cut on my miter saw, so I had to move over to my circular saw, and my circular saw wasn't big enough either, so I had to cut from both sides and match up those cuts nicely. It worked out quite well. I knew that I was going to be cutting it in half here. To about, I think it was 10 inches and 8 inches on the shallower piece. And I was going to be able to clean up the edges with the miter saw once I got this cut. Unfortunately, my circular saw still didn't have a large enough blade for it, so I had to cut from both sides. I was able to match these cuts up pretty nicely, and knowing full well that once I planed this board down, I was going to be able to cut the entire piece, a nice clean edge with my table saw. Did a bit of a dry fit here just to see how it would look. I really liked the look and the size, all seemed to be good, and so I started removing all the bark. One tip here, if I was to do this again, I would have been a little bit more careful with how I was chiseling. I ended up getting some decent grooves cut out with the chisel, and as you can see right here, some of them were fairly deep and I had to actually sand all of that out, which was definitely a pain. So if I'd taken a little bit more time with the chisel, it would have been nice and clean and I wouldn't have had those issues. I actually came back and chiseled it and tried to make it as clean as possible, just less work for my sander. So after about an hour of sanding and chiseling, I got that edge nice and clean and was really happy with the finished product. So the next major part in this build was to plane this board down to my desired thickness, as well as get any imperfections out of the board. As you can see, I was testing to see which side was the flattest. I used the flattest side down in the planer, as that would make the top side as parallel as possible, and it would make it as nice and flat as possible. And then I was able to go and cut out this piece of plywood that I knew had a nice flat edge to it, attach that to the side of the board that did have those lumps in it, and then I was able to put it back through my planer with the plywood side down to get that other side nice and flat. I was able to, all I did was I put little shivs underneath where the high spots were, and that made the board nice and flat. As you can see, the top side right now is the only piece that's being planed, as that's where I needed to shiv it just a little bit. And I was really happy with how this turned out. As you can see, I took the piece of plywood off, just attached it with a couple of brad nails, so it came out super easy. And then I tested the board, and as you can see, no more play. So all I'm trying to do here is create a nice flat straight edge on the back that was going to be attached to the brick. But unfortunately, as I miscalculated, my circular saw still wasn't quite thick enough to get through it. So I brought it over to my table saw and I made that edge nice and clean. I took it over to my miter saw to square off both ends and create it down to that final length that I was looking for. I then took it over and sanded all the imperfections out of it after planing. As you can see, there was a few cracks in it. I wasn't too worried about those, but it came out nice and clean, so I was happy. So this is where the magic really happens. I am trying to figure out exactly how wide of a board I'm going to need to cut from this mantelpiece in order to have that piece to attach to the brick, and then I can attach the mantelpiece to that board. and that's going to give me that floating look that I'm looking for, as well as matching the two boards and matching that grain so you don't really see that gap in there. As you can see, it basically just looks like a 2x4, but it's nice because it matches the grain perfectly. It's the perfect width and the perfect length that's going to match up perfectly with this mantelpiece. I made this little jig so I had a guide as to where to drill these holes, and it was going to be in the center of each board each time, as well as it was going to match up to the mantelpiece as well as the board attaching to the brick. So if you guys haven't figured out exactly what I'm doing yet, I'm drilling 3/4 inch holes out of that 2x4 looking board, and that's going to allow me to put 3/4 inch dowels into, glue those into that back board, and then slide the mantelpiece onto that board. So for the gluing process, I just dabbed a little bit of glue on my finger, swirled it around inside the hole, put a little bit more wood glue onto the doweling itself, and then slid that in the hole. Let it dry, and then I was ready for my dry fit. So if you're looking at this 2x4 looking board and you're thinking, hey Andrew, why is there like double the amount of holes that you're using dowels for? Well, that's because I messed up on my first go around and I drilled holes with that jig into the 2x4 board. And then I also drilled holes with the jig trying to line them up on the live edge mantelpiece. And they didn't line up perfectly, so I ended up clamping that 2x4 onto the other board and was able to line up those holes and just drill both at the same time, and that worked really well for me. And as you can see, it fit perfect. So you guys might be getting a better idea exactly what I'm doing here now. I'm drilling into this board where I'm going to be attaching those masonry screws into, and then I'll be able to slide that mantelpiece onto those dowelings, and that's going to create that floating look we were going for. Just like most of my projects, I did a Minwax wood conditioner stain and then followed by the Minwax dark walnut stain. I also made sure to take off that backboard and stain within the crack, just in case any of the wood in between was showing, it would still have that dark walnut stain that we were looking for. I then used a self-leveling Varathane to clear coat this entire piece. It works wonders as it self-levels and seeps into all the little cracks and just makes a really nice finish. If I had one tip, it would be to use long strokes when doing this, as if you do short little bits, it will definitely show up when it dries. Once I let the dark walnut stain dry, I then went over and attached that back board with my pre-drilled holes and the masonry screws. Once I got that backboard attached securely, I was able to slide on that front mantelpiece, and I was able to then go underneath it as I had pre-drilled holes into the tops of the wood doweling and attach screws to make sure that it was going nowhere. And as you can see, I was trying to shake it to see how much play it had in it, and the only play that I had in it was me moving the camera because it was solid. Everything had to come together really nicely for this piece, as I didn't have any access to live edge wood. My buddy Trevor was kind enough to give me a piece of his spruce, and my girlfriend kind of challenged me to get this mantelpiece done. I'd never done anything like this before. I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to attach it or how I was going to make this piece floating, but the masonry screws worked great, the doweling works great, and this piece just turned out amazing. And then to make it a little bit more homey, I added a couple pieces of decor to it, and it really lightened up the room. The seam between the backboard and the front mantelpiece turned out really nicely. You can barely see it, and it seamlessly connects the two pieces together. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you haven't yet, hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out a lot and allows me to continue doing videos like this. I really liked how this live edge turned out, and I'm looking forward to making more projects like this in the future. So stay tuned for those. Until next time, take care.